It happened in a room filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the smell of roasted chicken. My parents stood at the head of the table like royalty, and with a single sentence they put a price tag on me. She'll be adding 15,000 more to the wedding fund. If you've ever been betrayed by the people closest to you, this story will hit deep. Don't look away, stay with me until the very end. No question. No discussion. Just an announcement. Like I was an object being auctioned, not their daughter sitting 3 chairs away. I didn't flinch. I smiled. My fork pressed into the chicken on my plate, carving neat little lines while my heart thudded in my chest. No one noticed the way my jaw tightened. They were too busy nodding, laughing, raising glasses. But inside I made a promise. This would be the last time they embarrassed me like this. The hall was small-town fancy, rented for the rehearsal dinner. Golden wallpaper that had seen better decades. Flickering lights strung above our heads, swaying slightly whenever the air conditioner kicked on. I remember the way the clock ticked above the buffet table. 7:45 p.m. on a Thursday night, too early to feel this humiliated. My sister sat across from me, her manicured hand resting on her fiancé's arm like a prize ribbon. She smiled wide when the announcement dropped, as if the money was her due. Her lips curled just slightly, the kind of grin that said she knew I wouldn't dare argue. But she didn't know me as well as she thought. People chuckled politely. Someone tapped a spoon against a glass and said, "What a blessing to have such a generous sister." The word stabbed harder than I expected. Generous? Well, I wasn't generous. I was cornered. For years I had been their wallet, their safety net. $47,000 gone already. Scraped from my savings, my overtime hours, my cancelled vacations. And now apparently 15,000 more. I nodded politely, but my thoughts drifted elsewhere. To the folder hidden at home on my laptop. To the papers tucked neatly in my desk drawer, collected quietly over months. They had no idea what I had seen, what I had kept. That was my advantage. The chicken was dry, but I chewed it anyway, pretending not to hear the whispers. Pretending not to notice the way my sister leaned closer to her fiancé, whispering something that made him laugh. The sound grated on me, sharp and hollow. I excused myself, standing carefully so my chair didn't scrape. "Restroom," I said, forcing a smile. In the hallway the air was cooler, quieter. I pressed my palms against the sink in the women's room, staring at the mirror. My reflection stared back, calm eyes, lips curved just enough to look polite. But my knuckles were white, gripping porcelain like it was the only thing holding me up. I whispered, barely audible, "Enough." When I returned, no one had noticed I'd left. They were too busy toasting, clapping, filling the room with empty joy. My parents stood tall at the front, my mother's pearls glinting under the flickering light, my father puffing his chest like a man who had just won something. The sight almost made me laugh. I slipped back into my seat. My sister caught my eye, and for a second there was a flicker. Something smug, something triumphant. She believed she had me cornered. I tilted my head, smiled sweetly, and lifted my glass toward her. It wasn't a toast. It was a promise. Dinner dragged on. They passed around plates of store-bought rolls, bowls of lukewarm green beans, slices of pie with crusts too thick to chew. I ate every bite slowly, deliberately, while conversations swirled around me. At one point my aunt leaned in. "You must be proud of her," she whispered, nodding toward my sister in her white rehearsal dress. "Of course," I said. My voice was steady, but inside the words tasted bitter. Proud? Proud of being humiliated? Proud of being robbed? I dabbed at my lips with the napkin and leaned back. My chest felt tight, but not with anger. With clarity. The evening wound down, people gathering their coats, hugging, laughing, planning for the big day. I stayed seated, letting them move around me like waves against a stone. My parents stopped at my side. My father patted my shoulder. Heavy, dismissive. "We knew you'd come through," he said. My mother smiled, soft but sharp. "Family takes care of family. You've always understood that." I looked up at them, letting my eyes linger just long enough to make them uneasy. They shifted just slightly. For the first time that evening they seemed to wonder what I was thinking. But I said nothing. Just smiled. Outside, the air smelled of gasoline and damp pavement. Rain had passed earlier, leaving puddles glistening under the streetlights. I walked slowly to my car, heels clicking against the cracked sidewalk. Behind me, laughter spilled from the hall, muffled but still sharp in the night air. I paused by my car door, taking one long breath. My fingers tightened around the handle. My pulse steadied. They thought tonight was theirs. They thought they had won. But they didn't know about the files waiting on my desk. They didn't know about the evidence I'd collected piece by piece, year by year. They didn't know I was done playing the role they had written for me. When I slid into the driver's seat, the leather was cold. I turned the key, the engine humming low, steady. My headlights caught the reflection of the hall doors opening, my sister and her fiancé stepping out, arms linked, faces bright with victory. I watched them for a moment, unseen in the shadows. Their laughter carried across the lot, thin and hollow. I rolled down my window just enough for the cool night air to slip in. Just enough for me to whisper the words no one else would hear. "You'll regret this." And that's where the night ended, not with a fight, not with a scene, but with a promise. A promise they didn't even know had been made. Because while they celebrated, I was already rewriting the ending. The words still lingered on my tongue as I drove home that night. Window cracked open to the damp autumn air. The laughter from the hall had faded behind me, but it echoed in my mind like a taunt I couldn't shake. The road was empty, lined with trees swaying in the cool wind. My headlights caught the glint of puddles, the ripple of leaves skittering across asphalt. With every mile, the knot in my chest unraveled, not from relief but from certainty. I had made a promise. Now it was time to keep it. When I stepped inside my house, the quiet felt different. Not lonely. Not heavy. Just purposeful. I didn't even bother turning on the main light. Instead, I walked straight to my desk, the glow of the small lamp painting a circle of gold over the wood. There was the folder. A plain, worn manila folder stuffed with papers I'd collected quietly, carefully for months. Maybe even years if I counted the little scraps of evidence I'd tucked away long before I even knew why. I pulled it close, my fingers brushing over the uneven edges. Receipts. Letters. Copies of documents they thought I'd forgotten. They had underestimated me. They thought I was just a paycheck, not someone who noticed things. But I noticed everything. It started small. Unpaid bills shoved into the back of kitchen drawers. Late fees stacking on credit cards they pretended were under control. My father muttering about delays with the bank, thinking no one heard. I had heard. I had kept track. One envelope still smelled faintly of mildew, like it had been shoved under a stack of papers near the leaky window in their den. A final notice from the power company. My parents always made sure the lights stayed on when company came over, but I remembered the nights I stayed there when they'd light candles instead. "It's cozy," my mother said. But now I knew better. Then there was my sister. Perfect, polished, always the favorite. She didn't know I saw the photos she posted late at night, long after her fiancé had gone home. Drinks with men she didn't name. Smiles too close, hands brushing where they shouldn't. I never confronted her. I never said a word. But I saved everything. Screenshots, dates, comments tucked between the lines. It wasn't about jealousy. No, I had long stopped caring about being compared to her. It was about proof. Proof that the golden child wasn't so golden. Proof that the pedestal they placed her on was made of glass. I sat back in my chair, spreading the papers across the desk. The lamp's light made shadows stretch across the documents like reaching hands. My chest tightened, not from fear but from something sharper. Vindication. For years I had been told I was lucky to still have family. That no matter how much they took, I should be grateful to be included. They drained me dollar by dollar while smiling to my face. And I had smiled back. But they hadn't noticed the way I watched. The way I listened. The way I learned to keep things they wanted hidden. The next morning, I drove to their house under the guise of dropping off extra napkins for the wedding reception. My mother greeted me in her robe, hair pinned sloppily with clips, face sour until she realized who it was. Then she smiled, that sugary smile she wore for company. "You're such a dear," she said, taking the napkins like they were gold bars. I followed her into the kitchen. The smell of stale coffee clung to the air. That drawer by the fridge, the one where she shoved unpaid bills, was cracked open. I glimpsed the corner of an envelope stamped in red. Final notice. She didn't notice me notice. That was always her mistake. Later, when she went to change, I lingered near the den. My father's desk was cluttered with papers, old cigar smoke still lingering in the air. My eyes caught on a letter half buried under a sports magazine. Another overdue statement. I slipped it into my bag with a calmness that surprised even me. Every piece mattered. Every scrap built the picture clearer. As I drove home, I imagined them sitting at the head of the table, puffing their chests, announcing my contribution. They had no idea that I already had theirs. That night I stayed up late. I printed copies, labeled folders, organized screenshots by dates. It wasn't messy anger anymore. It was strategy. My hands trembled as I slid each page into place, but not from fear. From power. The kind of power they had stolen from me for years. Now I was taking it back. At one point my phone buzzed. A text from my sister. "Don't be late tomorrow. Bring a smile. It's my big day after all." I stared at the screen, her words glowing bright in the dark room. My lips curved into a smile she'd never understand. "Oh, I'll bring something," I whispered. The days leading to the wedding blurred, but my focus sharpened. Every visit to their house was another chance to find something new. Another slip of paper. Another clue. One afternoon I found an old photo tucked in a drawer. My father shaking hands with a man I didn't recognize, a check barely visible in the man's pocket. The date scribbled on the back matched the month he'd told me he needed help with rent. So that's where my money had gone. Not to keep the roof over their heads, but to fuel whatever shady deal he thought no one would trace. I pressed the photo flat in my palm, feeling heat rise in my chest. They thought they were clever. But I was patient. I never stopped acting normal around them. I answered phone calls, agreed politely when my mother reminded me of my duties as the older sister. I let my father pat my shoulder, his heavy hand like a weight I had carried too long. But every word, every gesture, only fueled the quiet fire inside me. When I returned home each evening, I added to my collection. The pile grew thicker, the story clearer. And with every page I felt less like their victim and more like the author of their ending. On the eve of the wedding, I sat at my desk surrounded by papers, the lamp casting shadows across the walls. Outside the world was quiet. Inside my pulse was steady. I slid the final document into the folder. My fingers lingered on the edges, feeling the weight of it. It wasn't just paper. It was years of being used condensed into proof. Proof that I was more than their wallet. Proof that I had power. I closed the folder, tied it with a piece of twine, and placed it gently into my bag. Tomorrow, I thought, they will finally see me. And then tomorrow arrived. The morning broke gray and cool, clouds hanging low over the neighborhood as if the sky itself knew what was coming. I stood at my kitchen counter, tying the last piece of ribbon around the small silver box. My hands moved steadily, though my stomach fluttered with nerves. The box didn't look different from the others I had seen wrapped for weddings. Neat corners, a bow not too extravagant, the kind of thing you'd expect to find stacked on a gift table beside blenders and cookware. Only I knew what sat inside, nestled carefully like a secret heartbeat. I slipped it into my tote bag and set out, locking the door behind me. The click of the lock sounded final. The drive to the church hall felt longer than usual, though I had traveled that road hundreds of times. The houses along the way looked ordinary, children's bikes leaning against porches, sprinklers hissing across tired lawns. Ordinary, but my life had never been ordinary. At least not in the way people assumed. At a stoplight, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. My lipstick was steady, my hair pinned in place. I looked calm. But behind my eyes was the quiet fire I'd been feeding for months. When the light turned green, I pressed the gas a little harder than necessary. The hall buzzed with activity when I arrived. Guests milled about in suits and dresses, voices rising in cheerful chatter. The faint scent of roses drifted from the centerpieces, mixed with the heavier aroma of catered food being set up in the back. I held my tote against my side and walked in with a smile that felt borrowed. My mother spotted me first, waving me over, her pearls gleaming beneath the overhead lights. "There she is," she said, kissing my cheek quickly before rushing back to adjust a tablecloth. Her perfume clung to me, heavy and sweet, almost suffocating. I slipped past her and headed toward the gift table. The table stood near the entrance, already stacked with brightly wrapped boxes and envelopes tucked into silver bowls. A young usher greeted me politely, his grin wide as he pointed to the space left open at the front. "Right there is perfect," he said. "Thank you," I replied, my voice even. I pulled the silver box from my tote, my fingers brushing the ribbon one last time before I set it down. It looked harmless there, blending among the others. Innocent. Ordinary. But I knew better. My sister's laughter echoed from across the hall. She stood near her bridesmaids, her white rehearsal dress replaced now by the fuller gown, lace sleeves brushing against her arms. She looked radiant, glowing in that practiced way she had always mastered. Our eyes met across the room. She lifted her chin, offering me a smile that carried no warmth. "You made it," she called loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Of course," I said softly, though I doubted she heard me. Her fiancé joined her side, straightening his tie, smiling with the kind of pride that came from ignorance. I almost pitied him. Almost. The ceremony hadn't started yet, but tension already pressed against my ribs. I found my seat near the middle, sliding in beside a distant cousin who smelled faintly of peppermint gum. "You must be proud," she whispered, nodding toward my sister. I offered a polite nod. "She does look happy," I said. But inside the words burned. Happiness built on lies was fragile. One gust of truth and it would scatter like ashes. I folded my hands in my lap, the hum of voices around me blending into a dull roar. My gaze drifted again to the silver box on the gift table, catching the light from the chandelier above. It almost looked like it was waiting. The officiant cleared his throat at the front, signaling guests to begin finding their seats. Chairs scraped, programs rustled, a hush rolling slowly through the room. My parents moved toward the front row, their steps proud and measured, as though they were royalty about to receive honors. I watched them, the way my father's chest swelled, the way my mother adjusted her pearls again, and I thought of the documents still sitting at home, the unpaid bills, the shady photographs. Proof of the cracks they worked so hard to hide. They carried themselves like kings. But even kings fall. As the ceremony began, I drifted in and out of focus. The officiant's words were polished, rehearsed, and I found myself studying the faces around me instead. Guests nodded with smiles, unaware of the storm hovering just above their heads. My palms rested flat against my knees, a steadying pressure. Every now and then my eyes flickered to the gift table. That little silver box sat silently, patient as a predator. I leaned slightly toward my cousin and whispered, "Pretty setup, isn't it?" She nodded. "Your parents must be so proud." I smiled faintly but didn't answer. Proud wasn't the word I'd use. At one point I excused myself, murmuring something about fresh air. I slipped out into the hallway, the noise of the ceremony muffled behind heavy doors. The air smelled faintly of polish and faint cigarette smoke from someone sneaking a break earlier. I walked past the gift table, slowing just slightly, letting my fingertips brush the edge of the silver box. Cool. Smooth. Waiting. For a moment I closed my eyes, imagining what it would feel like when it was opened. The hush. The confusion. The truth finally slipping free. My breath caught, not in fear but in anticipation. I returned to my seat before anyone noticed my absence. My sister was speaking now, repeating vows, her voice trembling just enough to sound emotional, not enough to reveal nerves. The guests leaned forward, drinking it in. My parents beamed. The air felt thick, heavy with expectation. And still the box waited. Time seemed to stretch as the ceremony moved forward. My heart beat slower, steadier, as though it already knew the outcome. The officiant lifted a hand, ready to close the vows. My sister's gaze swept the room briefly, landing on me just long enough for her smile to flicker. She thought she had won. I tilted my head slightly, returning her look with one of my own. Calm, steady, knowing. She blinked, the faintest crease appearing between her brows, before turning back to the officiant. The moment passed. Applause rose as the couple was pronounced, voices swelling, chairs scraping as people stood. The hall filled with clapping and cheers, my parents' laughter rising above the rest. But my gaze stayed fixed on the gift table. The silver box gleamed under the lights, quiet and unassuming. No one knew what it carried. No one knew that while they clapped and cheered, something else had already been set in motion. I folded my hands together, lowering my eyes as though in prayer. But the only words in my mind were simple. The words sat in my chest like a second heartbeat as the applause died down. People began shifting toward the reception hall, their voices bright, their steps light with celebration. The silver box remained on the gift table, untouched, patient. I followed the stream of guests, my heels clicking softly against the tiled floor. The air smelled of roses and roasted chicken, the same tired scent from the night before, but tonight it was heavier, almost cloying. My pulse stayed steady. The night had only just begun. The reception hall glowed with low lights and clinking glasses. Waiters rushed trays of champagne from table to table, their white shirts already stained with droplets of spilled wine. Guests laughed, their conversations layering into a dull roar. The band tuned instruments at the far end, a few chords ringing sharp before blending into melody. I sat at a round table near the back, close enough to watch the front but far enough to avoid being pulled into small talk. My cousin beside me leaned in with a grin. "Can you believe she's married now?" she asked, eyes shining. "Believe it?" I murmured. "I've been told it enough times." She laughed, not catching the weight beneath my words. I let her chatter, my eyes drifting again to the gift table. The silver box still glimmered faintly in the dim light, a steady reminder. Dinner was served. Chicken again, softer this time but just as bland. The sound of forks scraping plates mixed with the chatter. My parents sat proudly at the head table, glowing as if they had orchestrated a royal event. I caught my mother's eye once. She raised her glass toward me, her smile polished and smug. My father leaned close to her, whispering something that made her laugh. I forced my lips into a small curve. They believed they were untouchable. They believed tonight was theirs. I reached for my water, the glass cool in my hand. I didn't drink. I only held it, grounding myself in the weight of what was waiting. Midway through the meal, the best man stood, tapping his spoon against his glass. The chatter faded, replaced by polite applause. His speech was clumsy but heartfelt. Jokes about college days, promises of lifelong friendship, a toast that made the groom laugh too loud. As glasses clinked, I caught my sister's gaze. Her eyes flicked toward the gift table, then back to me. She smiled, wide and deliberate, as if reminding me of my place. I smiled back, calm, unshaken. She thought she had won. She thought I had surrendered. She didn't see the storm pressing against the walls around her. The music picked up. Couples moved onto the dance floor, skirts swaying, shoes squeaking faintly against polished wood. My cousin urged me to join, but I shook my head. "Not tonight," I said. My voice was soft but firm. Instead I slipped away. The hallway outside was quieter, cooler. The hum of voices and music dulled to a muffled rhythm behind the doors. I walked slowly past the gift table, my fingers grazing the edge once more. The silver box sat still, innocent. A waiter passed behind me, nearly bumping my shoulder. "Excuse me," he muttered, balancing his tray. A thin line of red wine dripped down the edge of a glass, staining the carpet in a dark blot. I watched it spread for a moment. Sting. Permanent. Felt like a sign. Back inside, the dancing had shifted to laughter and chatter. Someone had spilled more wine near the front, the scent of it strong, bitter, almost metallic in the warm air. My sister scolded a flower girl for nearly stepping into it, her voice sharp before she softened for the crowd. I sat again, folding my hands in my lap. My palms felt damp now, but my face stayed calm. My chest rose and fell in even rhythm. The DJ announced it was time for gifts. A ripple of applause spread and guests turned toward the table. My throat tightened, not with fear but with anticipation. My mother rose first, her pearls swinging as she gestured toward the gift table. "Let's show them how loved they are," she said, her voice dripping with pride. Guests lined up, handing packages to the bride and groom. Laughter, thanks, tissue paper rustling. My father clapped shoulders, shaking hands as if he were the one being honored. The silver box inched closer. I leaned back in my chair, my fingers curled tight against the fabric of my dress. The band's tune faded, replaced by the sound of paper tearing, ribbons snapping. My sister's voice rang out in delight, high and false. Then her hands reached for the silver box. The room seemed to still. My breath slowed. The chandelier light struck the silver paper, flashing bright as she peeled it away. She tugged the ribbon loose, the bow falling limp against her lap. She laughed lightly. "This looks fancy," she teased, lifting the lid. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Her face shifted, the smile faltering, her brows pinching. "What is this?" she murmured, just loud enough for those nearest to hear. The murmurs spread. Guests leaned in. My parents stiffened at the head table, their smiles frozen in place. She lifted the hard drive, small and dark against her pale hands. Whispers filled the room. Someone near me muttered, "What kind of gift is that?" Another laughed awkwardly. My sister turned the drive over in her hands, confusion painted across her face. The groom leaned closer, his expression tightening. "What's on it?" he asked. She stammered, I don't know." The air thickened. Glasses clinked faintly, chairs scraped as people shifted. My parents exchanged a glance, quick, sharp, nervous. My mother's pearls trembled slightly against her chest. And then the first phone buzzed. A guest gasped, scrolling quickly. Another phone buzzed. Then another. The sound spread like a wave, vibration, chimes, alerts, until nearly every table glowed with screens. Confusion twisted into shock. Murmurs sharpened into questions. Someone gasped loudly. A woman covered her mouth with her hand. The groom's mother shot to her feet, her phone clenched in her hand, eyes blazing. "What is this?" she demanded, voice cutting through the room. The groom snatched her phone, his face draining of color as he scrolled. His hand trembled. My sister's lips parted, her breath shallow. Chaos unfurled. Guests whispered, pointed, scrolled faster. The hum of phones buzzed over the fading music. My parents rose, their chairs scraping violently against the floor. This must be a mistake," my father barked, his voice too loud, too desperate. My mother clutched his arm, her eyes darting around the room, searching for control. But control had already slipped. The groom shoved the phone back at his mother, his face twisted in disbelief. He turned to my sister, his voice low but sharp. "Is this true?" Her lips moved but no sound came out. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded neatly, my face calm. My heart thudded once, hard, then steadied. Around me the hall buzzed with anger, betrayal, disbelief. Wine spilled again, glasses knocked over in the rush of bodies moving, voices rising. The stains spread across the tablecloth, dark and jagged, like truth seeping into fabric. My sister clutched the hard drive, her hands shaking. She looked at me once, wide-eyed, pleading, but I didn't move. The silence between us said everything. The officiant slipped out quietly, avoiding the storm. The band stopped playing, their instruments silent in the corner. Guests began leaving, shaking their heads, their eyes cold. The room emptied slowly, leaving fragments of whispers behind. The chandeliers flickered, shadows stretching long across the floor. My parents stood frozen, their faces pale, their shoulders heavy. My sister sat collapsed in her chair, dress wrinkled, mascara streaked. I rose calmly, smoothing the folds of my dress. My chair scraped softly against the floor, the sound sharp in the silence. I walked past them, each step deliberate, each breath steady. I didn't speak. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. As I passed the spilled wine, I paused, staring at the dark stain seeping wider across the carpet. The smell was sharp, bitter, lingering. It was fitting. I stepped over it, leaving them behind in the wreckage they had built. And I didn't look back. The wine stain was the last thing I saw before I stepped through the doors and into the cool night air. It spread across the carpet like a wound, dark and permanent, and I left it, and them, behind. The doors shut softly behind me, sealing the chaos inside. Out here the night was strangely quiet. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain and cigarette smoke from someone who had slipped outside earlier. The parking lot glistened under yellow streetlights, puddles catching reflections of the moon. For the first time in years I felt light. I walked to my car slowly, my heels clicking against the wet pavement. Behind me, muffled shouts rose from the hall, sharp and jagged, then fell again into confusion. They would argue. They would deny. They would scramble. But it was too late. I reached my car, slid inside and shut the door. The silence wrapped around me like a blanket. My fingers rested on the steering wheel, but I didn't start the engine. Not yet. I sat there, letting the weight of it all sink in. They had asked for 15,000 more. Instead, I had given them the truth. My phone buzzed on the seat beside me. A message from an unknown number. No, not unknown. The groom. Is this real? Tell me it's not real. I stared at the screen, my lips pressing together. The ache in his words was almost enough to stir pity. Almost. I typed slowly, each word deliberate. It's real. I thought you deserved to know. I hit send, locked the phone and dropped it back onto the seat. My chest rose and fell once, steady. I didn't owe him more than that. The drive home was quiet, the roads empty, the hum of the engine low and even. My mind replayed the images I had gathered, the bills, the debts, the photos, the lies. For years they had weighed on me, locked away in folders and drawers. Tonight they had been set free. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror again. My face looked the same, older lines, tired eyes, but something had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't looking at someone who had been used. I was looking at someone who had taken back control. The light turned green. I pressed forward. When I stepped into my house, the quiet welcomed me. No clinking glasses, no false laughter, no demands. Just stillness. I set my bag down on the counter and pulled the laptop closer. The folder of evidence still sat on the desktop, its name plain and simple. For them. I clicked it open one last time. The documents, the photos, the copies, all of it lined up neatly like soldiers who had served their purpose. My fingers hovered over the keys, then tapped delete. The folder disappeared. Gone. I didn't need it anymore. I made tea, the kettle whistling softly in the silence. The steam curled into the air as I poured it into my cup. Chamomile. The scent was gentle, calming, almost sweet. I wrapped my hands around the mug and carried it to the kitchen table, sitting down slowly. 4 years, this table had been the place where I'd calculated how much I could give them without ruining myself completely. Now it was just a table again. My table. I took a sip, the warmth sliding down my throat. Freedom didn't taste like champagne. Tasted like chamomile. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my mother. I let it ring until it went quiet. Then again my father. Then my sister. I placed the phone face down on the table, the vibrations humming against the wood until they finally stopped. The silence afterward was heavier, fuller, almost sacred. For once they had nothing left to take from me. Hours passed. I moved through the house slowly, almost like I was relearning the space. I opened windows, letting the cool night air flow in. I lit a candle in the living room, its soft glow chasing away shadows. The weight on my shoulders was gone. Not reduced. Not lightened. Gone. They had spent years convincing me I owed them, that my worth was in dollars, not love. But tonight I had shown them that truth can't be bought, hidden, or silenced. I smiled faintly, the candlelight flickering against the glass. Just after midnight, a knock rattled the front door. Firm. Desperate. I didn't move. The knock came again, louder this time. My mother's voice carried through, strained and sharp. "We need to talk." I stayed seated on the couch, my tea warm in my hand. The door remained closed. Another voice followed, my father's, rough and low. "You can't do this to us." I almost laughed. Do this to us? They had done it to themselves. The knocks continued, the voices rising, then fading as footsteps retreated. Silence filled the house again, deeper than before. I carried my empty cup to the sink, rinsed it and placed it gently in the rack. My movements were unhurried, deliberate, like a woman finally free of chains she'd worn so long she'd almost forgotten their weight. The clock ticked softly on the wall, 12:47 a.m. Each second passing was mine and mine alone. I turned off the lights, leaving the candle burning low. The shadows stretched and danced across the room, but they didn't scare me anymore. I climbed into bed, the sheets cool against my skin, and let out a long breath. Before I drifted into sleep, I thought of my sister. Her dress stained, her face streaked, her world collapsing under the truth. For years she had smiled at me like I was nothing more than a tool, a wallet, an afterthought. Now she knew better. I thought of my parents, their pride shattered, their empire of lies exposed. They had demanded my obedience, my silence, my money. Now they had nothing. The final twist wasn't in the documents. It wasn't in the photos or the debts or even the betrayal revealed. The real twist was simple. They no longer owned me. Morning light crept through the curtains when I finally woke. The candle had burned low, a small pool of wax hardened at its base. The air was fresh, carrying the faint scent of rain from the night before. I rose slowly, stretching, feeling lighter than I had in decades. The house felt different, as if the walls themselves recognized the shift. I brewed another cup of tea, carried it to the window and watched the world outside. Birds darted between branches, the street quiet and still. For the first time in years, I wasn't planning how to survive them. I was planning how to live for me. The phone lay silent on the counter, no new messages, no missed calls. I knew they would try again. I knew they would plead, argue, maybe even rage. But it didn't matter. I had already closed that chapter. I took one last sip of tea, warm and steady, and whispered aloud to the quiet room. "It's over." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They settled deep in my chest, final and absolute. I walked away from the window, the sunlight following me across the room. And for the first time in my life, the silence felt like peace. If this story moved you, subscribe now. I share more powerful revenge stories every week. Stories of women who rise stronger than the betrayal that tried to break them.